Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to another episode of You, Me, and ICED. I'm Dedra Stevenson. I'm your hostess with the mostest. I always wanted to say that. And my wonderful co-host, that would be the illustrious Mr. B, and Lene Pieters, and the wonderful Richard Dee. All fantastically talented people, all writers. Lene here is an artist in addition to being a writer and an editor as well. And as you probably know by now, I'm a writer as well. And, even though we're all writers and creative people, we all not only were children at one point, we all have children. And some of us, at least Mr. B, and I don't know about Richard, but maybe has grandchildren as well. You have
Yes, we
grandchildren?
do.
Oh my goodness,
So
five.
I
Look
have
at
two, he
you.
has four. Yeah.
Oh, amazing. Look at you guys with your grandbabies. I love that. Well done, you. Well, then you must know all about children's books, and that's the topic for today. Children's books are, as I see it, a wonderful opportunity to teach children ethics, to teach them, lessons, life lessons, hard learned lessons that other people have gone through quite a lot, to teach them, but in a fun way, in a storytelling, kind of framework so that they can learn it, sort of innately, And Lene and I have put together a wonderful, we've jointly done a children's book. Oh, let me see if I can, my background doesn't let it show very well. There we go. Little Loud Beatrice and the Magic Painting. Of course, I can post some pictures. Lene, I don't know if you've got it there. You've got some dolls there to show them. Lene did the illustrations. Oh, look, there's Beatrice herself. And there is the blue lady from the book.
And my favorite one,
the jester. The jester.
He can dance.
He can. That's fantastic, isn't it? Now, she actually used this in a mixed media platform so that we could have these wonderfully high quality illustrations for the book. And for those of you interested in checking that out, they're on Amazon and all your favorite, online stores. But that's beside the point. It's Little Loud Beatrice is an example of a book that can really get some big ideas across, even though it's a little book. I mean, Little Loud Beatrice, just to give you a quick little recap, she comes from a very noisy city. Very noisy, people throw parties, they do fireworks, they laugh, they enjoy, they really absorb life. And she has to move to a village with her father that is run by a very mean duke. And the duke has a constant headache, and he wants everyone to be very quiet all the time. And, loud expressions of emotions are not allowed in their new village. So Little Loud Beatrice decides that the best way she can express herself is through a quiet means of artistic expression, and that's painting. Hence the name, Little Loud Beatrice and the Magic Painting. And I'll let you read it to see what the rest of the story is all about. But I can assure you that it has an incredibly big message, behind it, even though it seems like a simple story. Now, what are some of you, just curious, what are your favorite children's books when you were a little kid? What about you, Mr. B?
I was almost hoping to go last because my thought pattern on children's book, after raising two sons and two grandsons being around, the idea was that they learn how to read. Some of the most fundamental children's book had the biggest impact in their lives because it's the time to learn how to read. And as a bragger a little bit, my sons learned how to read at by 4 years old. They were 3 and 4 years old. They were reading the newspaper level. And I was very, very proud of that. But how could I ever forget green eggs and ham?
Personal
Right?
favorite of mine as well.
So the Dr. Seuss collection was just, it become a fundamental part of our lives and our children's lives, and what they were able to learn from those children books and examples of just the fascination of learning to read. It was amazing for them.
Oh, lovely, lovely. And it's not only a bonding experience with children, it's like you said, children who are read to learn how to read faster. They develop a larger vocabulary as well. That's scientifically proven. Hey, how about you, Richard? What was your favorite growing up?
I grew up reading Enid Blyton stories, mainly the adventure ones, the Famous Five and the Secret Seven and that sort of thing. And I suppose they gave me a taste for adventure in a way. And also they gave me some good ideas for my own sort of work. Yeah. And I went to school when I was 4 years and 1 month old. And by the time I was 5, I was reading, certainly. And I just devoured books. I just loved reading. And anything of that sort of nature. And then I progressed past that into my teenage years, but I still kept reading adventures. And then I discovered science fiction. But if you think back at those sort of books, they all had a message, as we were saying before, and they all taught you values, and they taught you principles, and they taught you honesty, and they taught you all sorts of things without really trying. If you know what I mean, it was there and it was implicit, and it gave you a framework to live by, really.
Would you recommend those books today for parents that are just coming up? Are they still available?
They are still available. They've fallen out of favor because of the times in which they were set are unrecognizable, I guess. I was writing an article for my blog this morning about growing up in the 1960s, and I realized it's a different planet. And I think,
It is, right?
I think the stories, even though the stories are universal, the settings and the way people speak would just be so unrecognizable to people today. They need a rewrite, really, to make them relevant, which is a shame.
Yeah. In the book, there was always a moral to the story, and then today you wonder which moral are we addressing or touching, or whose buttons are we pushing, whose toes are we stepping on.
And there's it's all about selling the books, these days. I mean, more than really teaching anything, it seems, and that is a crying shame. Honestly, I think that children's books in particular have a sort of a social responsibility. But that's just my opinion. But they are held to a higher standard, I think, than fiction novels and even science fiction that are really entertaining at the very first bit. They have to be entertaining and engaging, but children's books, they have to hit a mark. That's my personal opinion. What do you think, Lene?
Well, times certainly have changed. When I was very small, my mother used to read to me from her collection of the Grimm brothers fairy tales that was published in the 1930s that she'd received when she was small in the 1951 or 1952. And reading the stories translated into Afrikaans, they were quite higher level of language, and they were extremely brutal. Some of them gave me nightmares. But she also used to make up little children's stories with little parables about the little sailing ship that ignored his mother and sailed too close to the beach, and the wave knocked him onto the sand. She would make up all these little stories herself. As a child, for me, I loved the stories that had a bit of illustrations in them, especially one of the collected, you get the big A4 hardcover book with collected fairy tales in, and I actually collect them now over the years because I love the illustrations. But the ones that caught my attention always had, apart from the main story character, a little mushroom in a corner with windows and doors and smoke coming out of a chimney. And that's been my hook. So I'm a fantasy and sci-fi reader as well, and I build doll houses to scale. So I guess that triggered my interest. But they wrapped up all kinds of life lessons about choices and consequences in entertainment, or sometimes the fear factor, to make that more impactful on a child. And it is a crying shame now that everything's been commercialized. There are certain visuals that are being pushed onto children's books. What if a child doesn't like to see something in explicit color? They want to make up their own image in their mind. So by feeding them everything that's highly illustrated, you almost railroad them into a certain aesthetic. instead of letting them develop their imagination, which I think is the more valuable of the skills that they take from these children's books. But my childhood favorite as well at one point was The Cat in the Hat. That was just, I still have it. I still have that book.
I loved, that was my favorite for sure for reading to my kids. I loved reading The Cat in the Hat and Green Eggs and Ham. I used to read to my children. And I tell you what, every last one of them learned the ABCs from Dr. Seuss's ABC. They learned that was how they all learned.
Our generation.
Their ABCs. Yeah. They didn't learn them from school. They learned them from Dr. Seuss's ABC.
And as I again past 60, I recently went back and started looking for a couple of books I was interested in. And one of them was the Aesop's Fables.
Oh.
And so they validated something. I was like, where did I get these information from? Like the Fox and the Hound and Sour Grapes, on different the Turtle and the Hare and all this type of fables that was written in there that taught so many lessons. And I couldn't recall where I got them from. So my wife helped me figure out that was the book that had all of them in it. And so there are a few versions. And so that's another nice thing to do, is to go back and validate some of the thought patterns in our minds at this age. Or where did we see that? Or where did we get that? Did grandmothers tell us, or did they read it to us? And so it's really, really, I mean, children's books are amazing to go back and validate so many things that are in our minds.
That's a really good point. I think with all of our choices here, we're all sort of validating our tastes as well, for what sort of writers we became, what sort of creatives we became as well. My favorite children's book was Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Nice.
And I think that really shows now. With the kind of books that I ended up writing. I mean, the kind that take you into a fantasy world, where magical things happen, and the possibilities are endless. That's what really appealed to me about that story. And also it really appealed to me because Charlie chose his family, over anything else. So it was just, I think, maybe, there's a lot of examples in my real life where I've chosen my family over certain missed opportunities, or things that have come up. And I think, was it reading Charlie and the Chocolate Factory that made me inclined to do that? Maybe it had a lasting impression on me. Who knows?
Yeah, and that's what it's really all about. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Richard was
So,
going to say something. I thought you were going to say something.
No, it's if you want to get a message across, the best way to do it is by entertaining people, because then you can get your message and they'll receive it, and it doesn't feel like learning, and yet they are learning.
what about your grandchildren, Richard? Do you read to them?
I do, yeah. I don't see them as often as I'd like to, but I do read to them now. And in fact, they can read themselves mostly now. The youngest is 5, apart from the baby, of course. And she reads very well for her age, and she actually wants to read me a story now when we go and see it, which is nice. And it's great. It's and you can join in, you can make it a real interactive experience, which is lovely,
That's lovely. And that goes back to what Lene was saying about how, making up stories on your own, with the children, and having their imagination just sort of take it to a different level, right?
Yeah, I never missed not having illustrations in the books I read at school, because I could form a picture of what was going on in my head.
Yes.
And I think, as you said earlier, without being led to someone else's interpretation, you have the ability to make your own.
Right.
For sure. Like my grandsons are 11 and 15, and so definitely wouldn't be doing any reading to them because they're probably busy playing a video game.
That was going to be what I was going to bring up next, honestly, is now, all right, what do we think about the video games? I mean, has that had the negative impact that we all suspect?
Again, it would just, Lene, go ahead. You were going to say.
Well, I have 2 teenage daughters now, and because I'm a gamer, I get the adrenaline junkie rush of working against a timer or playing with a team against another team, or even just the scrolling visuals. If a game hooks you and you love the storyline and the game mechanics, great. what I've been seeing is, however, some games that actually involve a little bit of reading in game, as in character letters or clues, things like that, is a very underdeveloped genre that can bridge the gap for parents. And I'd like to see more developers working on that kind of context. We used to have a game called Myst back in the 1990s, which you had to read the letters. You were alone on this planet and you had to read stuff and solve the clues. And there's not, I don't know of many games like that now, because as I said, there's now so many games and I don't play many myself. But in that way, I would like to see more of the Web3 development as well, with apps and reading apps adding rewards for children, or parents can use it as a reward chart. If the child has read a few books, it's much easier with an ebook, though, to monitor, that they can tie that in with an app, get rewards, and then have a bit of free time or the joy of going to buy another book in the bookstore. Because face it, they are expensive. They do take up space. I have my mother's collection of original books with me since she passed. They're mine now. And I feel obliged to keep them for my grandchildren one day, because they are truly going to be antiques. I think in 10 years' time, they qualify as antiques now. And I also have my own childhood books with me. And they not only do they have sentimental value, but they also become a time capsule of the time in which they were written and the social norms of the period. And we shouldn't just rush into the digital age and get rid of everything physical, which is why I also use discarded library books and school library books in my art, because that paper had a meaning. It went through dozens of little hands who had hours of joy reading them, and therefore it now has a value. But it's definitely something we need to bridge with a technology shift for sure.
Yeah.
It's a shame that Rodney wasn't able to join us today.
And that was in my mind. I wanted you to give him, if you talk to him one-on-one, to give him our greetings and the season's greetings. And, because we just went over here in the United States, Thanksgiving Day, eating turkey and so on. So he would be the perfect one to help express these video games and how the children relate to them. But in today's educational, there's a lot of video games with educational, like block differentiation, color differentiation, and other coloring book type things, algorithms for kids to use electronics to learn, and maybe be like a book. Mary Had a Little Lamb is probably in digital somewhere or a video game somewhere, so someone could start learning how to count and could count each little lamb. But we grew up on the book, we grew up on the conversation, we grew up on learning from that child's book how to read, how to count, how to do basic math, and so on and so on. So it's like you say, Lene, it's something we should never discard, never.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, I totally agree with that. These are things that are treasured experiences, and they mean a lot, when you're helping to shape who that person is going to end up being, as an adult. You never know what sort of impact that's going to be. Also, you have to consider that there's an awful lot more children diagnosed with learning disabilities now. So they're also quite helpful in regards to that. I have an autistic son, and I can tell you, using electronic, reading sort of apps and videos, have been incredibly helpful, teaching him words and, more language, and he's very proud of himself, when he learns a new word. And autistic people in particular are incredibly visual. This is how they learn in pictures. And that's, a lot of people don't realize that, when you say, for example, shoes to somebody who's autistic, they might remember every single pair of shoes they've ever seen, because it's very visual. They don't see the word shoes, in their mind. They see pictures of shoes from the time they were little until the time they have them now. That's what it means to them. Very interesting and wonderful way their mind works. It's never ceases to amaze me, actually.
Sure.
Anybody else have an experience with that?
Well, when you said that, I started thinking right away about the large apple and the two size letter A's in the books we grew up with too. So they'll put a large capital A, a little, common A, and a big apple in the middle of the book. So we did picture association very, very early too. And so when you learning the ABCs and you have these large pictures, I don't care whether you're autistic or just as artistic as all of us are. We were learning with those pictures, and I'm really glad you said that, because those are not discounted children's book. Those are children's book that was used right away to help us learn. And if we have ideas about a children's book that brings up things that are allowed in each of our communities, sometimes here in the United States, some things are not being allowed anymore, and it's kind of scary. But the idea is, if it's allowed, we should still creatively bring them out, because there's nothing wrong with bringing or helping children get through new thoughts, new ideas, or experiencing a deflation of a trauma they've been through, because a lot of kids have experiences. And so sometimes children books get to these points where we can talk about something that even in the normal day we can't clearly express, that it may be worth bringing out the points out of that little book and bringing them back into a sense of calmness.
Right. Now, on raising an autistic child, when you said that, it reminded me that we call them social stories, in that regard, that whenever there's, for example, an unwanted behavior happening, we've done this with Ibrahim 1,000 times, and we find a social story on an app. For example, when you get angry, hitting is not acceptable, and it's all about a little boy who's feeling the feeling angry, and he's got the look on his face. I'm sorry for the dune buggy sounds, by the way. Evidently, my neighbor decides that now is the best time to go dune buggy riding.
We're not hearing it over here.
Oh, good. Okay, terrific. But yeah, no, it's all about teaching, him that getting angry. When you get angry, you say out loud, "I am angry." And now he actually does that. He literally will say the 3 words, "I am angry," rather than trying to hit somebody or break something, so it's really, this is just the most wonderful resource, social stories. So never underestimate the power of storytelling and visuals, to affect behavior. And you know what? I think that we should probably talk about that, the last few minutes here. If people have ideas for children's stories, do you think they should probably go ahead and pursue getting that out as an ebook at least?
I would agree, because I don't think people should hold back, because we look for that one, just like these podcasts. If we get one beneficial listener, someone who really benefits from the information, then mission accomplished. So if someone was to publish their book, I bet there is one person who can really benefit from it. So
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that, Richard, on how they would go about doing that?
Yeah, the easiest way is the same way that just publish it, just write it and publish it. Because as Mr. B says, there's always someone. You'll always find someone to read it, and you'll always find someone who'll benefit from it. And the great thing about the electronic book is that it has given a lot more people the chance to read a lot more things. Because there are people, for whatever reason, can't get to a bookstore, or can't afford a book, or can't physically get the time to actually read it, but with a few clicks they can read as much as anyone else. So there's always room for another way of getting the information across.
And ebooks are so environmentally friendly, aren't they? I mean,
so
many so many trees don't die. What about you, Lene? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I have 2 parts to this answer. I would like to see more, and I want to say culturally indigenous books for children by people from different cultures in different countries. I have seen parents here in Dubai walk past entire shelves because the books were written for other religions, kids in other countries, or children who have 0 things in common with the children here. And it becomes a case of us versus the big corporates who are trying to push these products and negating every child's experience in a particular other country. People are constantly complaining about whitewashing of stories and political issues. But the people in the different communities need to step up and write down their stories, create that oral tradition, capture it in written form. And if you have no drawing skills whatsoever, ask the children to illustrate it, involve a community, and put each child's picture in the little book. There is no limit to what you can publish, as long as it just complies with all the normal social norms and standards. Go for it. Empower a local artist. Use kids with disabilities. How would they draw this character on this page? Make it a community effort to create a treasure, because we are the guardians of the stories for the next generation. And if they haven't written it down, they stand to lose quite a lot of their own cultural values, I feel. So in that sense, an ebook is great, but if you even just get some kids with paper plate masks for the characters to do a green screen photo shoot in front of a living room wall and act out the scene, and you can take a picture, you have an illustration for your story. And there will be a child somewhere who loves reading and watching those pictures. So yes, definitely go for it.
And I think all of you, before we close, all of you would agree with me that Lene's voice would be a perfect book. What do you call the ebook that reads to you?
Oh, the
audio book.
If you haven't thought about that before, please do some of that in your lifetime.
Well, actually, years ago, I volunteered at the Society for the Blind in South Africa to read audiobooks for blind, because my grandparents were blind. They tested my voice and said my voice was too high. So maybe it's time to try again. I don't know.
Well, that's ridiculous, because we have too many things we can control all of that. But your voice articulates speech very well, and it would serve as a wonderful voice for anything, I think. That's what I think.
I agree.
It's such a pleasure to be with you guys all on today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see everybody next week then. Take care.
For sure.
Thanks. Have a good one.
Have a good one.